Hey everybody, welcome back to DYOR, Do Your Own Research. Today I want to talk to you about a comparison between tariffs, since they seem to be a pretty hot topic lately in the news, and the Federal Reserve. I want to do a side-by-side comparison of them quickly and then just give you enough to whet your appetite so you can go and do your own research. On the congress.gov website, there is a section here where it says Congressional Delegation of Tariff Authorities to the President. Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, known as the Legislative Vesting Clause, provides that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Article 1, Section 8 includes among Congress's specific powers the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. The Constitution thus gives Congress the power to enact legislation imposing tariffs, although it qualifies this power by providing that tariffs shall be uniform throughout the United States and by prohibiting tariffs on U.S. exports. In this exercise of its constitutional powers, Congress has enacted laws granting various tariff authorities to the President. The U.S. Supreme Court and lower federal courts have sometimes been faced with deciding constitutional challenges to these laws in cases where plaintiffs claimed the laws impermissibly delegated Congress's power over legislation and tariffs to the executive branch. Supreme Court decisions upholding tariff laws have become landmarks in the development of a broader non-delegation doctrine concerning the extent to which Congress may lawfully delegate authority to the executive branch, being the president. Here's one example of a court case. In Marshall Field and Company versus Clark, the Supreme Court upheld a provision of the Tariff Act of 1890 directing the president to suspend duty-free importation of sugar, molasses, coffee, tea, and hides in the event that he was, quote, satisfied that the government of any other country producing the exporting those products imposes duties or other exactions upon the agriculture or other products of the United States, which he may deem to be reciprocally unequal and unreasonable, end quote. U.S. importers adversely affected by the president's use of this suspension authority claimed that it unconstitutionally delegated Congress's legislative power to the president. The Supreme Court disagreed, holding that the challenged provision does not in any real sense invest the president with the power of legislation. Rather, because the provision required the president to suspend duty-free treatment of certain goods if he found another country's duties were reciprocally unequal and unreasonable, it made the president the mere agent of the law-making department. Thus, the court explained the challenge provision called upon the president not to make law, but simply to execute a law enacted by Congress. So, in this case, we see that the president at the time was just executing the laws that were on the book. So there is the general idea of tariffs. Now, a point I want to make to you about tariffs here too is that with tariffs, you'll find out that the tariffs that are being placed on other countries are bringing money into the United States of America. You'll find out too that with those tariffs that are coming in, that's external income. That's money coming in from the exchange of goods and money from foreign countries into the United States, and the costs that those countries have encumbered upon themselves to do business with the United States. Now, on the other hand, think about the Federal Reserve and the laws around the Federal Reserve and what the Federal Reserve actually is. Here's a brief history of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Income Tax Act of February 3rd, 1913. All right, February 3rd, 1913, the U.S. government instituted the federal income tax law. And they said that only the highest wage earners were going to be the ones paying the law. which of course, as we know today, has morphed into everybody paying taxes on their income. In December 23rd of that same year, 1913, the Federal Reserve was enacted through law. And the Federal Reserve was the one that was tasked with taking that federal income tax and bringing it into the Treasury. Now, the interesting thing about the Federal Reserve is that the Federal Reserve, although it came in through a law by Congress, if you look at the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve is set up, the Federal Reserve is a non-elected group of officials within that Federal Reserve. It is a private entity and not a part of the government. Although the law was enacted to create the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve is a private institution with private officers, non-elected, and they are the ones that are actually the ones that create the Federal Reserve note, what we call the dollar, the US dollar, which is really not the US dollar, it's the Federal Reserve note. Because if you look on a 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, or $100 bill, you'll find out that the written across the top of that is Federal Reserve note. It is not a United States dollar like it used to be before 1913. Now, what is the Federal Reserve note backed by? The good faith and credit of the United States government. What was the United States dollar backed by? Gold or silver. God's money. Now, going on, we find out that the Social Security Act was enacted through law on August 14th, 1935. So it was at that point that Social Security started to be stolen from the people and taken out of their paychecks without them even asking or allowing the government to do it. It was enacted by a law. So we were taxed, and our money has been being stolen since 1935 by the federal government, by the Federal Reserve, by the U.S. government. Got to realize, too, that this whole time that we've had federal income tax, we've had Social Security, and the Federal Reserve has been in place, the Federal Reserve creates money out of nothing and then loans it to we the people, and we the people end up paying it back with interest. And it costs them nothing to create it. They just create it out of thin air. Now, the problem with gold and silver is you can't create it out of thin air. You have to go and actually physically, manually dig it out of the ground and bring it out, and it has a finite value. And anything that is tied to that with that value, that thing, in the case of the US dollar, will have that value to it. Back when gold was and silver was the legal tender of this country, one United States dollar was equal to X amount of gold or X amount of silver. So if you took a US dollar to the bank at that time, in those days before the Federal Reserve and before income tax, you could go to the bank, present your United States dollar, and you could cash it in for silver or gold equivalent, whichever you cared for. You can't do that nowadays because the Federal Reserve note that we call the dollar, which is really not the US dollar, it's a Federal Reserve note, is printed out of nothing, like I said, by people who are not elected, and it's a private entity. My encouragement to you guys today is do your own homework. Check up on tariffs. Don't believe what the news headlines are telling you. Don't believe what the talking heads are telling you. Don't believe what the people on YouTube and the influencers are telling you. Do your own homework. My encouragement to you, please do your own homework so you know what's going on and you know what's happening in your government, in your country, in your neighborhood, in your state, and your locality. By all means, do your own homework so you can be an informed citizen, and so that you know what is going on and you know how to vote, and you know who your officials are that are doing things constitutionally, and you know who is doing things unconstitutionally. And therefore, you can make an informed decision on who to vote for when you go to the polling place in November. Take care. Until next time, we'll see you later.